better. Sin 1, they sold the innocent for silver, the needy for a pair of sandals. So they sold others into slavery when they were in debt. So they didn't just collect on the debt, they sold people into slavery for their debts. Even something as small as if you owed them the amount for a pair of sandals. So you even owed this much money, they thought nothing of selling the needy into slavery. And remember, this is going, Israel is in a place of wealth. It is in a place of richness. There's a lot of affluent people in Israel right now. But this is one of their key sins. So they're selling people into slavery for their debts. This cuts exactly against Deuteronomy when it says that if a fellow Israelite from one of your villages in the land that the Lord you're giving you should be poor, you're not supposed to harden your heart or be insensitive to his impoverished condition. Instead, you must be sure to open your hand to him and generously lend him whatever he needs. So you're not supposed to sell him into slavery so that you collect. No, instead you're supposed to respond generously, even if that means you give of what you have, so that they have what they need. Sin number 2, they trample on the dirt-covered heads of the poor. They push the destitute away. So they're what this is referencing is that the courts are uniformly siding with the creditors who have the money over the debtors who don't have them. So justice is being perverted because the courts are always going off with the people that can maybe pay them off. That, again, that's a perversion of justice. You must not pervert justice or show favor. Don't take a bribe, for bribes blind the eyes of the wise and distort the words of the righteous. You're not supposed to take bribes. And then there's a lot of other moral issues too. A man and his father are sleeping with the same girl. In this way, they show disrespect for my moral purity. This could mean several things. We don't think of other religions having like temple prostitution, but that was part of a lot of the pagan religions around then, is that they were fertility gods, and so you went and you worshiped that god by paying money, offering an offering, and then having sex with that temple prostitute in the temple, and then the fertility god is pleased and sends rain upon the crops and stuff like that. So it could have been that. It could also have been servant girls that you're abusing. It could also have been female relatives. None of this is good. Like, there's not really a better or a worse here. This is all really bad. Okay? And whatever that looked like, you've got fathers and sons partaking of that. And Israel is doing that. They stretch out on clothing seized as collateral. They do so right beside every altar. The idea here is they're taking, sometimes if you're really poor, you might give your cloak or some item of clothing as collateral until you repay the debt. But what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to take good care of that thing for the time of when they would return it to the person who owes. And in this case, they're treating it with disregard and they're just considering it as theirs, almost as if they never intend to give it back. And they're doing it right beside every altar. They're doing it right next to their pagan worshipings. And they drink wine bought with the fines they've levied. They do so right in the temple of their God. So there's this pagan worshiping, but this is a theme, that they're levying these great fines to crush the poor and crush the destitute, and then they're using it to live this lavish lifestyle where they're like drinking wine and financing their luxuries off of the fines they've imposed. So then Amos reminds him of, so he's listed those sins, and then he's going to remind him of the past grace. Just as a reminder, God talking here, just as a reminder, you guys, just so you know, like, I destroyed your enemies. They were as tall as cedars, strong as oaks. I destroyed everything that they had. I ripped them out, root and branch. I brought you up from the land of Egypt. Again, just reminding you, I did do that. I led you through the wilderness for 40 years so you could take this land as your own. I made some of your sons prophets. If it weren't enough that I brought you all out of Egypt and vanquished your enemies and gave you this land that you're now abusing, I even gave you special spiritual gifts. I made some of your sons prophets and some of your young men Nazarites, which, think of those as like people that have like monastic gifts, like our monks, those who want to spend their lives kind of set apart in Christian study and worship and fellowship. That's kind of the closest equivalent to what a Nazarite would be. And so Nazarites couldn't do things like they couldn't eat wine, drink wine, or they couldn't do certain things because they were set apart in that way. Okay? The Lord is speaking. And so that's what I've done because I've been a gracious God to you. And how did you respond to that? You made the Nazarites drink wine. You desecrated their sanctity. You commanded the prophets, do not prophesy. I think I'll say on this, we could be guilty of this too. This is not just them. This is them saying to the people that are supposed to speak God's truth, don't speak that truth to us. What form could this take? Oh, I don't know. People going up to Pastor Brandon and saying, hey, Brandon, you might not actually want to teach on, I heard you're going to teach on this subject this Sunday. Well, just so you know, like, you might not want to do that. Such topics like that don't really go over very well here. You probably don't want to speak that. It's not going to be very popular. I'm just letting you know. Okay? So when we say to our pastors, yeah, these, whether explicitly or just implying it, that, you know, if you teach on these subjects here, not going to go very well. You're going to get a lot of pushback. So we can be just as guilty of this. And he says, look, for all these things, I'm going to press you down like a cart loaded down with grain presses down. Just crush you down. It's not going to matter how fast you are. It's not going to matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter if you're going to be a warrior. You're not going to be able to get away from me. Archers will not hold their ground. Fast runners will not save their lives, nor will they ride horses. It doesn't matter if you're a brave-hearted warrior. So when the judgment comes, it doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to be able to fight this. And this judgment he's speaking to is that eventually in 722, a nation called Assyria is going to come down and just totally destroy Israel and carry everybody off. So that's kind of what he's referencing. He's like saying that judgment's coming because of what things look like for you now. I think just some quick lessons before I go to the next session of Amos. With all those prophecies, God holds all humanity to account. So the injustices that you see going on around the world, the Lord sees and remembers, and he will judge. Okay? We can rest in that. It doesn't need to necessarily come from us, although it might. But the Lord sees and he will judge. 2, God is patient, and at some point our sin overflows past a certain point to where he responds. But thankfully he doesn't respond to every little sin we commit, but if our sin gets bad enough, he will respond. Like, his patience does have a limit. And as we saw with Israel and Judah, and I commented on this last time, we're responsible for the special revelation we hear. We, church community, are held to a higher standard. Okay? Non-Christians are not going to be judged by the Lord for not pursuing holiness, because they're not even on that level. Okay, they're not going to be held to that standard because they don't even know who this Jesus guy is. So to expect them to be held to all of the way in which we behave as a church, like, it would be unreasonable, and God doesn't do that. But for us, who have the word, who have heard the word, who come every Sunday to our classes and our Sunday service. We've heard this message. We don't have that excuse that we have not heard it. And the Lord says, I know you know this, and you believing in me, I'm going to hold you to account. The weight of God's prophecies. He's going to talk about, like, how much does this mean? So he says, listen, you Israelites, to this message which the Lord is proclaiming. This message for the entire clan I brought up from the land of Egypt. I chose you alone from all the clans of the earth. You had a special covenant with me. Therefore, I'm going to punish you for all your sins. Okay? If I were to translate this, I would say, I'm punishing you because I chose you. You're in this, which a covenant is, I do this for you, and I agree to do this for you, and you agree that you're going to walk with me. And he says, do two walk together without having met? Which I thought was kind of a weird sentence, and I kind of had to think about it for a while, but ultimately it's like, if you're walking together with someone, you don't do that unless you meet the other person, you guys greet each other, and you say, hey, you want to walk this way? Yeah, I'll walk with you. Okay, great. You don't do it just really by accident. And the idea being, you guys chose and agreed to walk in this relationship with me. You chose that I would hold you to account in this. You said that you would walk in holiness. Does a lion roar in the woods if he's not cornered his prey? Does a young lion bellow from his den if he has not caught something? Does a bird swoop down into a trap if there's no bait? Does a trap spring up from the ground unless it has surely caught something? Israel took that bait of sin, and it was snared. And if an alarm sounds in a city, do people not fear? If a disaster overtakes a city, is the Lord not responsible? Certainly the sovereign Lord does nothing without first revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. Now, so in other words, when these disasters come, because I am the initiator of them, you're going to hear about it because I'm sending people to make sure you hear about it. Now, I think we need to clarify here. Does God do work without telling us every little detail? Yes. Yes, he does do that. However, God doesn't administer this covenantal judgment without first telling his people. And that's something that, even though we are in relationship with God, we're not in the covenant that Israel is in, where he kind of sat down with us and said, okay, if you guys follow this, then I'll do this special blessing and curses relationship that Israel was in that we're not. Okay, but he's saying, okay, you've breached the contract, so when you do that, and I need to punish you for it, I'm going to let you know about it, and that's why you're getting Amos here telling you all this. A lion has roared, who's not afraid? The sovereign Lord has spoken, who can refuse to prophesy? So then we get Samaria. Who's Samaria? That's the portion of the land where Israel's in. So now we're going to hear of its fall. Make this announcement in the fortresses of Ashdod and in the fortresses in the land of Egypt. Huh? What? Why are we talking about them? I thought we were talking about Israel. That's weird. The idea here is that in a capital trial, where you've got the death penalty at stake, you needed two witnesses to testify. And in this case, he's calling the nation of the Ashdod is a Philistine city, and calling Egypt, hey, you two other nations, you're going to be witnesses to what I'm going to do to Israel. Which stings if you're Israel. Because, again, they considered those other nations to be way worse than them. And God is now using them as witnesses to what he's about to do to Israel. Gather on the hills around Samaria. Observe the many acts of violence taking place within the city, the oppressive deeds occurring in it. Just watch. They do not know how to do what is right. The Lord is speaking. That isn't me. That's in Scripture. It's actually in parentheses. The Lord is speaking. Not Amos, Lord. They store up the spoils of destructive violence in their fortresses, which is a really interesting thing to say, because other nations, what this would mean for other nations is, I go out to war, I conquer X nation, I plunder it, and I bring all that loot to my fortresses, right? Like that is what it would be for most countries. But what's happening here with Israel is the spoils come from their own people. They're raiding the poor, and they're raiding their own people and filling up their fortresses with loot from their own country. So there's no national loyalty. There's no goodwill to others. They're looting the poor. Therefore, says the sovereign Lord, an enemy will encircle the land. He will take away your power. Your fortresses will be looted. This is what the Lord says. Just as a shepherd salvages from the lion's mouth a couple of leg bones or a piece of an ear, so the Israelites who live in Samaria will be salvaged. They will be left with just a corner of a bed and a part of a couch. Part of a couch is just no good. The idea being, when that nation comes, there's going to be nothing really left of you except a little piece of meat, a little bit of you left. Most of you going to be gone. As functionally as a nation, you won't really exist further. I think we see this in that after, right now we've got the country of Israel, and then after Assyria comes and does its thing, they're gone. And then after Babylon comes and does its thing to Judah, they get exiled, but then they come back and they call themselves Israel. But this land of Israel never really becomes a thing again. The most we hear from them is this word called Samaritans. And they don't really have a country. Like, they live in Samaria, but they're not really a country anymore. It's just, those Samaritan people that live there. They are no longer big enough or sizable enough to even be like a power worthy of consideration. They just kind of live outside of Israel a bit. Okay? Listen and warn the family of Jacob, the sovereign Lord, the God who commands armies. So interesting, these names for the Lord that we're not used to. The sovereign Lord who rules over all, the God who commands armies. We don't often think of God as this, but he very much is. In this case, when he's judging, certainly when I punish Israel for their covenant transgressions, I will destroy Bethel's altars. The horns of the altar will be cut off and fall to the ground. What they're talking about here is the pagan altars that instead of, they were supposed to worship God at the temple in Jerusalem, but Israel said, nah, let's just set up our own altars, and let's just put a big calf at them. Let's just worship the calf, because that's just as good. Like, it's good enough. Like, it's all right. Like, that's basically the same. Am I right? All right? And God's saying, no, I'm going to destroy that. I will destroy both they've got winter and summer homes. The wealthy of Israel. See, they have summer homes too. They've got their winter homes in the cold parts, their summer homes in the warm parts. They've got their multiple houses while the poor are suffering. But they've got their poor houses. And so I know exactly who I'm targeting this at. And I'm going to destroy their winter and summer homes and these houses that are filled with ivory. So they've got, just if you can imagine the interior of these houses, and apparently there's this ivory everything. So they're incredibly lavishly and opulently decorated. And I'm going to ruin them. These great houses will be swept away. I think it is a very, well, let me go a couple verses and then I'll address that. This one's interesting. Listen to this message, you cows of Bashan who live on Mount Samaria. Then as now, to use the word cow to refer to women as a pejorative it still holds. This is directed at the women. This is directed at the women of Israel, the wealthy women of Israel. Okay? You cows of Bashan, to tell you exactly how the Lord feels about their behavior. You oppress the poor, you crush the needy, you say to your husbands, bring us more to drink. All right. First off, husbands, you don't get, if your wife asks you for a glass of water, you don't get to say, well, Nate said that Amos said I don't have to do that. Just getting that out of the way right now, that's not what's going on. You see the main thing here of what they're doing. They are participating. They're not just keeping house. They're participating in oppressing the poor and crushing the needy through this injustice and through these lavish fines. And what we get the picture of is women who are incredibly wealthy, incredibly well-fed, very lazy, and demanding to their husbands to satisfy their needs. So they're making their husbands oppress so that their physical desires can be satisfied. So you think of the stereotypical wife who's demanding all these things from the husband who's at work. And so demanding that, hey, you need to go and find some more of those poor people. Do you have any debts you can collect on, or someone, like a poor person's house you can seize? Because that little patch of the house needs a little bit more ivory. Now those delicacies that you brought me the other day, I want more of it. So they're complicit and they're encouraging this. So she says, okay, for you, God says, the sovereign Lord confirms this oath by his own holy character. Certainly the time is approaching when you will be carried away in baskets. Every last one of you in fishermen's pots. You're going to be like cut up meat carried away. That's how you're going to leave Israel. Each of you will go straight through the gaps in the walls. You'll be thrown out toward Harmon. So you're either going to be cut up and carried off as meat, or you're going to be carried off as prisoners by Assyria. And that wasn't very pleasant. Assyria would stick a hook in your nose and kind of lead you off with a chain. Assyrians weren't very nice. If you live lavishly, this is just as true today as it was then. If you live a lavish lifestyle and your income is based, and you can do that because it is based off the suffering of others, you can fool others that that's okay, but you cannot fool God. God sees, God hears the cries of those who are oppressed. And you could say, and this goes out to those whose businesses and companies and corporations are structured on such a way in which they immiserate their people and make them live in poverty for their own gain. And you might say, well, Nate, there's nothing, like everything that, if you were a major corporation doing this, well, Nate, everything that we're doing is legal. Like, it's all legal. There's nothing illegal in what I'm doing. It's all very legal. God doesn't care if it's legal. There's legality, but then there's morality. And God cares about the people that are hurt.
God doesn't recognize loopholes either.
Mm-hmm. Yes. God will see and will judge. And that's exactly the way Israel is living. I think in many ways we have some of the same problems. Then the Lord turns back and starts, so he was judging specifically the women there, making sure that they realize that they're part of the problem. Then he turns back to all of Israel. Says, Go to Bethel and rebel. At Gilgal, rebel some more. Bring your sacrifices in the morning, your tithes on the third day. This is the way you would say, go to Bethel and worship. At Gilgal, worship some more. These were places of community worship. But he's like, they've become places of community disobedience. They've become places of community rebellion. Oh, you bring sacrifices very obediently in the morning. Oh, see, this is where things get hard. This is where things get extra convicting. They bring the sacrifices in the morning just like they're supposed to. Your tithes on the third day, they're great tithers. Great tithers. They tithe really well. They do all their sacrifices just like they're supposed to. Burn that thank offering of bread made with yeast. Make a public display of your voluntary offerings. You love to do this, you Israelites. The sovereign Lord is speaking. Outwardly, they're doing everything right. They're making sure that their religious community has everything it needs. Let me just make things really uncomfortable. This could be applied to us. Oh, Portland First, you love to have your communions every so often. And you love to come and baptize people. And oh, you're so generous at your offerings. But if our hearts are out of alignment with God, and in our private life we are abusing others, and we are not at all concerned with God's holiness, God does not care about any of those things. And God is saying, if you're out of alignment with me and you are sinning so grievously, I don't care what offerings you bring. And I don't care how awesome your tithe is. And I don't care how many times you do communion. And I don't care whether or not you baptize lots of people and you feel like that's just really awesome. I know where you're really at. You are not serving me. In fact, you're grossly sinning. You love to do this, you Israelites. That could be us. We could fall into this same trap. And so I tried to send you reminders. I gave you no food to eat in any of your cities. So I sent you warnings. First, you lacked food everywhere you live. So I sent famine so that you would come back to me. And you didn't come back to me. I withheld rain from you 3 months before the harvest, right when you most needed it. Right when stuff was starting to grow and you could harvest it, I took away rain from you so that you would starve a bit. And what I did was I sent rain intermittently so you never knew where the food was going to be. So one day I'd send rain over here, and so you'd have to run over here to get water or food. And then I'd send rain over here one day. I kept you guessing, so you didn't have a steady supply of food. One field would get rain, but the field that received rain, so there was no consistency. And people from 2 or 3 cities staggered into one city to get water, but remained thirsty. Still you did not come back to me. So that didn't work. I'm still trying to remind you, Israel. I'm trying to bring you back. I destroyed your crops with blight and disease. Locusts kept devouring your orchards, vineyards, fig trees, and olive trees. Still you didn't come back to me. So even when I destroyed your crops outright, and I sent against you a plague, like one of the Egyptian plagues. And I would have thought you would have understood that. Because I sent the Egyptians plagues, and you know that those are really significant. You know those would have only come from me. So I figured you'd get it. And so I figured, well, maybe I need to send them some serious war. And I figured that when you smelled the stench from the corpses, that might get through to you. But you still didn't come back to me. And so I figured, well, okay, I've got to blow up some of your worst cities. So I overthrew some of you the way God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And I overthrew some of you, and others of you I kind of pulled out of the flames. But you still didn't come back to me. Man, I tried everything. I'm here as like a last resort. I didn't want us to be at this place. I wanted your hearts to change. Therefore, this is what I will do to you, Israel. Because I will do this to you, prepare to meet your God, Israel. And if I were before God, I'd be like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Prepare to meet your God. One of the most chilling things we hear God say in Scripture. For here he is, He formed the mountains and created the wind. He reveals his plans to men. He turns the dawn into darkness and marches on the heights of the earth. The Lord who commands armies is his name. I tried everything. Outwardly, you were dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's. You gave so generously to the church. But man, the way you abused your people and the way your hearts were out of alignment, you think I didn't see that you were bringing a really great tithe to the church, but then you left the church and you were worshiping idols the next days? Do you think I didn't see that? And I tried to send you reminders, and they didn't work. So now I've got to bring out the full judgment, and you're not going to like it. And we'll see what that looks like next time. Any thoughts or questions? I think it is very sobering. I think we like to think that all these issues from the prophets, well, they just applied then and they were just to Israel, but they don't really apply to us now. Like, we're so different now. Like, it's so different. Everything's so different. We've got our iPhones and our Netflix and stuff like that. It's all so different. But there's these similar themes throughout, and people's hearts struggle with the same things, and God still demands the same things from us, and still wants us down this holy walk with him. What do you think? Have a good week. Cupcakes, coffee. Take one on your way out. If you want to order some cupcakes, Becky's right here.
Thank you, Becky. Dave, Becky made those cupcakes and just
You're on, that's right. You're on
That's perfect. Probably need to keep up, right? Yeah.
I printed all the cards. I printed them, yeah. I printed them all for him, and then he's working on
I did,
Nate, do you want this?